My brother has always required more, my parents justified after leaving me out of their will. I cut off their monthly support, and now they're pleading for help. I'm 27 years old, working at a well-regarded consulting firm in the heart of the city, assisting businesses in navigating an ever-evolving market. My office boasts a view of the skyline, and on clear days, I can see all the way to the bay. I've carved out a respectable career for myself, despite the challenges. On the surface, everything appears fine. I have my job, a cozy yet stylishly furnished apartment in a decent area, and a close-knit group of friends I can count on. But there's one shadow that looms over my life, my family. Growing up, I always felt like I had to vie for my parents' attention. It wasn't that they were neglectful in the traditional sense, they weren't cold or distant. However, there was always an emotional barrier between us, a glass wall I could never quite shatter, no matter how hard I tried. For as long as I can remember, my younger brother, Ethan, was the focal point of their world. He was always the one who needed more attention, more nurturing, more everything. Ethan had this uncanny ability to draw people in, like a planet with its own gravitational force. From a young age, he mastered the art of being the helpless one in the family. He wasn't a troublemaker in the usual sense, but he knew precisely how to manipulate situations to his advantage. All he had to do was show a hint of vulnerability, let his eyes glisten with tears, and act like he needed help with something, and boom, our parents were wrapped around his finger. They fell for it every single time, like clockwork. The pattern was so predictable it was almost laughable, except it wasn't funny to me, not at all. I didn't have the same luxury, I wasn't helpless, and I couldn't pretend to be. I was the responsible one, the rock, the foundation. While Ethan would skip school, sleep in late, or refuse to contribute to anything at home, I was the one holding everything together with both hands. I was the one who ensured I stayed on top of my grades, who helped with household chores without being asked, who got a job at 16 to start saving for college. My weekends were filled with extracurricular activities that would look good on college applications, while Ethan spent his lounging around the house, claiming he was too anxious to participate in anything. Yet, none of my efforts seemed to matter to my parents. I wasn't the problem child, so I never needed extra attention. I never needed to be coddled or comforted. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to require everything, and my parents were always there to provide it without question. Even as he grew older and should have become more independent, he started to rely on them more and more. They never stopped being his safety net, his fallback plan, his eternal cushion against the harsh realities of life. I can still picture those moments in our home when Ethan would saunter into the kitchen, looking pitiful with his hoodie pulled over his head, shoulders slumped dramatically. Without fail, Mom would be there instantly. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Are you okay?" she would ask, her voice laced with concern, dropping whatever she was doing to attend to Ethan's latest crisis, even if nothing was actually wrong. He had a knack for making it seem like the world was ending. My dad was no better. "Do you need something?" "Anything at all," he would ask, his wallet already half out of his pocket. Ethan didn't have a job, didn't pay rent, didn't do much of anything productive with his time, but he knew how to play the role of the eternal child, and somehow that was enough to make my parents feel like he was the one who needed all of their energy, all of their resources, all of their love. Then there was me. I tried everything to make my parents proud, by excelling in school, by becoming financially independent as quickly as possible, by helping out at home without complaint. I thought I was doing all the right things, following the unwritten rulebook of being a good son. I genuinely believed that if I just kept doing my part, they'd notice me. I thought that if I helped them financially, if I sent them a little more each month to cover their mounting bills, then I would finally earn their approval, their recognition, their love. But that never seemed to be the case. My parents were always politely grateful for the money I sent them, but it never felt like it was truly about me. It felt like it was about keeping the peace, about doing what was expected of me as the reliable son. It was obligation dressed up as appreciation. I sent them money every month, sometimes skipping meals myself to make it happen every single time. Without fail, my parents would hand over the money to him. They would either write him a check or give him cash without asking a single question, their faces a mix of concern and resignation. I'll never forget the time I discovered he had asked our parents to help him buy a new car, not just any car, but a brand new one. Not a practical, economical model either. It was something flashy, something with leather seats and a sunroof, something he absolutely didn't need. And they handed him the money without hesitation, despite the fact that their own bills were piling up on the kitchen counter and they had been asking me for extra money to cover their utilities for the past 3 months. I was furious, not just because he was asking for something so extravagant while contributing nothing, but because my parents had no boundaries with him whatsoever. They had become so blinded by his manipulations, so wrapped up in his web of neediness, that they didn't even see what was happening right in front of them. They were giving him money for everything while I was left on the sidelines, barely scraping by, and still expected to keep giving like an endless well that would never run dry. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. Ethan wasn't just manipulating them for small things, he was manipulating them for big things, for life-altering decisions. He had his hooks in deep. I started to see how he was controlling the family finances, how he was setting the tone for every financial decision my parents made. He was always in charge, always the one dictating what they spent their limited resources on. I could see how he had started to condition them, making them feel guilty for saying no to his increasingly outrageous demands. He would say things like, "I'm your son, Mom and Dad. I need you, or I don't know what I'd do without you," his voice trembling just enough, eyes wide and pleading. That was all it took. They couldn't say no to him. They couldn't stop themselves from giving him whatever he wanted, even if it meant calling me later to ask for more support. That's when I began to feel the real weight of what had been happening all along, the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. I wasn't just being ignored or undervalued, I was being used, deliberately and systematically used. My parents were using me to fund a lifestyle that allowed Ethan to remain dependent and lazy. They weren't helping him grow up or become self-sufficient, they were enabling his immaturity, his perpetual childhood. In doing so, they had created a monster, a manipulative, entitled person who would never learn to stand on his own 2 feet because he never had to. I started to feel like I had been nothing more than a cash machine all these years, just an extension of their financial lifeline, while Ethan was the one who got all the attention, all the love, all the concern. I received the occasional thank you email or text message when my monthly deposit hit their account. Then came the moment that changed everything, the catalyst that finally opened my eyes to the full extent of the situation. I was over at their house one rainy afternoon, helping my parents go through some old files they had stored in the musty attic. We were sorting through boxes of yellowed bills, faded receipts, and outdated tax papers when I stumbled upon something that made my stomach drop, their will. It was completely unexpected. I didn't even know they had updated it recently. But there it was, their names boldly scrawled at the bottom of the page, the ink still relatively fresh. I skimmed through it at first, thinking it was just another old draft or something irrelevant, until I saw the words, "All assets, including property and savings, shall be transferred to my son, Ethan." My heart sank like a stone. I couldn't breathe, the room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. What the hell? They had left everything to him, everything. The house I had helped them keep with my monthly payments, the savings account that my money had contributed to, all the sacrifices I'd made for them over the years, everything was for Ethan. A cold rush of anger mixed with a deep, aching sense of betrayal radiated through my entire body. How could they do this to me? How could they choose him, the one who had done nothing to deserve it, the one who had never shown any ambition or care for anyone except himself, the one who had been draining them dry for years while I propped them up? I closed the will and shoved it back into the box, as if by doing so I could erase the reality of it. But I couldn't. The words were burned into my memory, branded onto my heart. I was suddenly filled with a toxic mix of rage and hurt, like I was suffocating under the weight of all the years I had spent trying to make things work. I was the only one doing it. I never questioned why I was always the one to pick up the slack, to be the stable force in our family when things got tough. But now, I couldn't stop questioning everything, every memory, every interaction, every sacrifice I had made. Every phone call with my parents felt strained now, loaded with unspoken accusations. When I spoke to them, all I could think about was how they had been blind to Ethan's manipulation, how they had never once truly acknowledged what I had done for them. Every time they called to thank me for sending money or helping out with something, it felt like a slap in the face, like salt in a wound that was growing deeper by the day. It wasn't that I didn't want to help them, it was that it felt like they didn't even care about what I had done, about the life I had put on hold for them. They didn't even realize how much I had given, how much I had sacrificed to keep everything running smoothly, to make their lives a little easier while Ethan continued to drain them. I knew deep down that I had to confront them, but I couldn't shake the fear and anxiety that gripped me whenever I thought about it. I had always tried to be the good son, the one who kept things together, who didn't make waves. I had never been the rebellious one. I was the one who always did what was expected of me, who followed the rules, who played my part in the family drama without complaint. Now, everything felt like it was falling apart, like the ground beneath my feet was crumbling away. How could I confront my own parents? How could I accuse them of something that, deep down, I had always feared was true, that they loved Ethan more than me, that everything I had done for them was nothing more than an obligation in their eyes, a duty to be fulfilled rather than an act of love to be appreciated? That evening, I called my mom. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number, my palms slick with sweat. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before she finally picked up. Hello? Her voice was warm and familiar, but it felt distant somehow, like she was speaking to me from across a vast chasm. Hi, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotion swirling inside me. We need to talk. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, wondering what this was about, perhaps already preparing her defenses. What's going on, Andrew? She finally asked, her tone changing slightly, sensing the seriousness in my voice. I found the will, Mom, I said, my voice coming out in a rush before I could lose my nerve. I know about Ethan. The words hit the air with the weight of a ton of bricks. I could feel the tension through the phone line immediately. My heart was racing in my chest, but I pushed on, knowing I had to get the words out. I don't understand, I continued, my voice cracking slightly with emotion. Why him? After everything I've done for you guys? I've been supporting you, helping out every month, and you've left everything to him. Why? For a long moment, there was silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end, but she didn't say anything. It felt like hours passed, but finally, she spoke. Andrew, she started slowly, almost as if she were choosing her words carefully, walking on eggshells. Ethan has always needed more. He's always been lost, struggling to find his way. I've tried to give him everything I can. He's not like you. You've always been so strong, so independent. You've never needed me the way he does. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Was that really how she saw things? That Ethan deserved more because he was weaker, that I deserved less because I was stronger? What do you mean he needs you more? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. I've always been here for you. I've always tried to make your life easier. But it's never been enough. You've never really seen me, have you? It's always been about Ethan. Everything I've done for you, all the sacrifices I've made, it's never been enough. There was another long, painful pause. I could hear her breathing becoming unsteady, and I knew she was trying not to cry. I didn't mean for it to be like that, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant for you to feel like this. Well, that's the problem, Mom, I replied, feeling a surge of courage. I need some space. I need to figure out what to do next. The room went quiet, and I could hear my mother sobbing softly from where she sat on the couch, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't be that person anymore, the one who always made things better for everyone else while my own wounds festered. I walked out, feeling a weight lift off my chest but also a deep, aching sense of loss. I had just confronted my parents, stood up for myself for perhaps the first time in my life, but in doing so, I had also lost them. There was no going back after this, no pretending that things could ever be the same. I was done being the invisible son, the ATM, the safety net. It was time to take control of my life, to put myself first for once. As my emotions swirled like a tempest on the drive home, I realized something else. This wasn't just about the will. It wasn't just about Ethan's manipulation or my parents' blindness to it. It was about me finally standing up for myself after years of silent submission. It was about me learning that I was worth more than just being the family's financial support system. It was about learning to love myself enough to let go of toxic relationships, even when those relationships were with the people who gave me life. And that was the hardest thing of all. The days after the confrontation felt like I had just stepped off a cliff into the unknown. My mind was in constant chaos, replaying the scene over and over, wondering if I had done the right thing. I had finally said the words I needed to say, the words I had kept bottled up for so long, but the moment they left my mouth, I felt an emptiness take over me, like I had just severed a lifeline that I had been holding onto for years, a connection that, despite everything, had defined me. For a brief moment, I almost regretted what I had done. I almost picked up the phone to apologize, to take it all back. But deep down, I knew I couldn't go back. That path was close to me now. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I called my bank and froze the automatic transfers I had set up for my parents. My finger hovered over the confirm button for several seconds before I finally pressed it, finalizing the action. It felt like the hardest thing I had ever done, but at the same time, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, a burden I had been carrying for too long. I was stopping the cycle, the destructive pattern that had kept me in a place where I was only valued for what I could provide, for the security I represented. It was the hardest thing to do because I felt guilty, like I was abandoning them when they needed me. But the guilt started to fade once I realized that I had been abandoning myself all along, setting aside my own needs and dreams to fulfill my assigned role in the family drama. I couldn't explain to anyone how much it hurt to walk away from someone you've spent your whole life trying to help, trying to make proud. It was a pain that cut deeper than any betrayal I had ever known. It felt like I was cutting off a piece of myself, a vital organ I couldn't live without. I had always believed that family was everything, that blood ties were unbreakable. But I had to face the harsh fact that sometimes family can hurt you the most because they know exactly where your vulnerabilities lie. They know exactly which buttons to push, which strings to pull. As I distanced myself from my parents and Ethan, I began to focus more on my own life, my own needs that had been neglected for so long. It felt like I was waking up from a long, dreamless slumber. There was so much I had pushed aside, so many things I had abandoned in my quest to be the perfect son, the things I loved, the hobbies that once brought me joy, the dreams I had set aside. They were all waiting for me to reclaim them. It was like I had spent all these years just going through the motions, doing what I thought I had to do, being who I thought I had to be, without ever asking myself what I actually wanted. But now, I started to rediscover myself, piece by fragmented piece. I took up painting again, something I had loved as a child but had abandoned because it wasn't practical, because it didn't contribute to the family's bottom line. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped making time for it. I didn't have the energy or the emotional space for creativity when I was so focused on survival, on meeting everyone else's needs. But now, with the weight of my familial responsibilities finally lifted, I found myself picking up brushes again, letting the colors flow onto the canvas, expressing the emotions I had bottled up for so long.